Lucia Castle here with teacher. The sixth episode is on the nervous system of the voice. The nervous system of the voice, being the voice mostly into the head and the neck, is controlled and mostly related to the cranial nerves. The cranial nerves are nerves that come from the brain, as their names say, and they came out from a structure that is the brain stem. They comes out and they do their route to where they are predisposed for. For voice production and for us, we have mostly 4 of them, which are the Roman number 9, 10, 11 and 12. Cranial nerves are nerves that can be efferent or mixed. Afferent means that they bring informations to the brain. Efferent, they bring motor to the parts they control, and mixed when they have both the functions. For us, we have 2 efferent nerves, which are the 11th, the accessory, and the 12th, the hypoglossal. The hypoglossal is for the tongue. It controls all the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the tongue. The 11th is an accessory, and it's quite interesting because it's an accessory that it has 2 branches completely different with different origins and functions. The cranial portion of this nerve to form with the vagus nerves, they join into one nerve that is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Yeah, laryngeal. It is the nerve that it is for the control of the intrinsic laryngeal muscles. And in the other function, it goes it has a spinal portion that innervates the sternocleidomastoid. You remember perhaps from the pharynx episode, one of the muscles, there are a pair, one on the left and one on the right, that have to do with the opening of the pharynx and the trapezius muscle. And this is interesting. I just do a little diversion, because when you see some very renowned singers doing as Whitney Houston and as this other classical singer Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, often you see them quite late in the career coming up and using the trapezius to do something. In my understanding, that is very minimal, because this instrument is so complex that the more I go and the more I know that I really don't know so much, and I know very, very little. And when they do that while singing and then they sing, in my understanding is that they're using something very refined to add a posturing into the pharynx to their breathing and to the mechanism. So I know many teachers, they say, no, never use your shoulders to breathe, it's completely wrong. It depends on the context. It depends if you use at the place of something, or if you used to add something and to refine your way of singing. So probably it's not the best thing to start with, but the best thing to start with are the basics, and not going too much far, because you don't control much more. But when you see those singers, I have the idea they're using not exactly for breathing. Yes, of course, they're using also for breathing, but especially for posturing. For posturing, and posturing is very important for singing, and you can do many things and many different things with all the posturing we can do, nearly basically everywhere. We come back. So this is the accessory. So the accessory, yeah, is that, and the recurrent laryngeal nerve. For the larynx, for the cricothyroid muscle, it is another nerve. It is the superior laryngeal, and it is the one that has to do with the high notes, very high notes. And the superior there are two different branches of the vagus nerve. So we are there. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve, it's a mixed cranial nerve. It is the number 10. And the other mix that I said it was another one, it is the number 9, that is the glossopharyngeal. That is the nerve that controls the pharynx, the elevation of the pharynx and the constrictors of the pharynx. I'm going to read something for you because it's quite interesting, because we said that they have efferent or mixed functions. Anyway, we open for the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is something pretty important. It is, as we said, the efferent for the function of the larynx, but it's the afferent for other things. And it's open something that is very specific to voice production and singing, and all the training of singing, all the ideas we have on singing, all the different schools and all the different practices we do to get to singing. Parasympathetic efferent fibers from the dorsal vagal nucleus to the thoracic and abdominal viscera to the splenic flexure of the colon represent its major neural component. This means that it is mostly an afferent of the autonomic nervous system, all the visceral nervous system, and it is just a 20% efferent, meaning the motor control. This has great implications because it is responsible for many responses in the body, from the heart rate variability to sensing the stretches into your lungs tissues. So when we change breathing habits, it is the one telling you that you are changing and telling you, come on, you are not stretched as usual, you have to do something. And it is something in the practice of voice production and voice training is very important, because when you change, you have to acknowledge the previous references you have, and if you want to change them to get to a better outcome and better performance. It is a nervous that has a lot to do with inflammation, immunity, depression, what is called the vagal tone. I put into the resources something that is very controversial. It has been quite important probably to make step forwards, but to me it's quite limited, and I'm not convinced so much that is the polyvagal theory. I'm not the only one not being convinced, and that I'm not convinced is not very important, but someone like Andrew Huberman, and you have something on the vagus system and nervous system in his podcast, very precious for us, in which also they say it's not convincing because we can activate the vagal tone and we can stimulate the vagus nerve with some effects, even if they are not what the polyvagal theory claims and preaches for. So I will read for you something that the vagus nerve, it is also important motor output from the nucleus ambiguous to the pharyngeal and soft palate muscles, so not only the larynx. Somatic afferents, somatic are those that brings the information, supply the posterior cranial dura and the portion of the ear and the external auditory canal epithelium. The visceral afferents, again, that brings informations from the pharynx, larynx, aorta, that is the great artery bringing the blood to the heart, thoracic and abdominal viscera, and taste buds from the root of the tongue and epiglottis synapse. It brings afferents, somatic, from the ear and epithelium of the ear. Do remember Michael Trimble, Eileen Farrell, me and many others telling you, you don't have to listen to yourself while you're singing. You can hear yourself, but you can't listen to yourself. Yeah. The same thing is for the viscera. If we want for our vagus nerve to be the one being efferent, being the active for singing, we have to activate it. We have to use it to activate it. But since it's mostly an afferent, meaning bringing informations, when we get to sing, we have to decide if we want to listen to the afferent part or if we want mostly to use the efferent part. This is completely speculation, I know, I'm sorry. But at the same time, for us, it's very important because we know by Huberman Lab and by many other practices of yoga and breathing exercises that when we activate quite tonic way the breathing, the singing, the, how can I say, being there and being propositive, we stop listening too much from what comes from the inside. Doesn't mean that we don't hear it. We hear it very well, but we stop just staying there listening to it. And at the same time, it has a great effect into our mood, into what we can communicate, transmit, etc. For that polyvagal theory, something says, and that's why I put some articles there. One was controversial, then they published again. It was controversial, they controlled again if to retire it, but then they decided not to retire, but they just say we have to control that the number are not too small. And this was for the polyvagal. One of the articles I put for the polyvagal theory, the one of 2014. When we say that, we say that something that we can refer with the activations and the stimulation and the vagus nerve and its effects. Because we know for singing that we have some kind of those effects. We have a modulation of the inflammatory response, we have a modulation of the mood, we have a modulation of the peristalsis, we have our heart goes better, there are some resources and some research done on choral singing, especially for that, and we know that good singing does that. For the polyvagal theory or for other theories, they want to suppress the sympathetic activation and they want to activate the opposing, calming capacity of this suppression and the activation and bounding and feeling of safety of the vagus nerve. Yeah, it is something, probably it is something, it has a sense. What is the problem for me as a singer and for training practices for that? Is that we are not always calm while we are singing. We are not always singing things that are not in arousal. For example, that they don't bring some also sympathetic arousal in the person for emotional reasons, or also for excitatory system reasons. Exercise activates the sympathetic system, and we know that when we sing we are not just calm and down. Yeah, for some styles, for some people, for somebody that they are a very little part of the singers and little part of the music we do. So what Huberman says and what we see and what I see in singing and what I see in training practices is that we have a third way, third path. Is that okay? We don't get completely blocked by the sympathetic, by what? By activating the efferent and the propositive, as we can say, part of the vagus nerve. To activate that, we get in contact with it. And with my students, sometimes I see that they get in contact and they get not immediately accustomed that when you really get into contact, you have to choose if listening to the afferent parts or to activate the efferent. I don't have answers. I have some strategies, I have some bridges, I have some things I think about. But the question of the nerves and of the nervous system is exactly that, is when we have this big nerve, sorry, I was saying, I'm still in the skeletal last week, what it is important? It is important to acknowledge that, to me, it gives us information about how we stay and we act on that. But this is probably something true for some people. For others, we can be inundated by all those informations, or usually we don't want to feel those informations, or we have a too high sympathetic response and we don't get to choose simply to find this third path, that is by the stimulation of the vagus nerve. Because as in one of the articles I put, what is important now is to say that even if anatomy is quite clear, we are getting to understand it is less clear than what we thought. So we have sympathetic and parasympathetic, afferent and efferent functions, and they intersecate into one with the other. And what we can do is that we can leverage something just to get out of where we are stuck. And so when sometimes we say, okay, just sing, don't mind, how is it coming? We are trying to get you out of the sympathetic block and out of the fight or flight response by activating the laryngeal muscles, and so activating and stimulating some of the vagus nerve. I didn't find exactly directly singing doing that, but I'm quite sure it does. It does by breathing. I'm quite sure I found just one on the arm, but it was a theory because you feel some vibration. I'm not that sure that it's that, and that it doesn't convince me because it's not so, how can I say, it doesn't look really a huge study stating, yeah, we studied that we have after a kind of stimulation. It has the yoga, and the yoga breathing has this kind of stimulation, but as very often with the breathing, we have to see if the breathing, someone can do a correct breathing, or is it too much dysfunctional into the body. Of the breathing is a thing that we can do, but sometimes if you start too soon and you are dysfunctional, you are not getting the effect that you want because you are simply not using the correct form of the breathing, and it needs investigation. It absolutely needs investigation, but as you see, it opens, to me it opens a world. Also to see that it is afferent for the organs, it is something for which, and the organs, which organs? Well, the organs that have something to do with the external world, again, as I said, for respiration, and as I said, for digestive system. So when we are singing, are we interacting with what? Just with our voice, with the music, with the sensation into the skin, or with the sensation of something more deeper and more, not mysterious, but less conscious or directly conscious, that becomes conscious by singing, perhaps? To me could be something. Well, to recap,